Hello everybody, this is Cars, etc., etc. I'm Sasha Martinengo, and of course the show is brought to you by altcointrader.co.za. Go to their website, register, and you can start trading in cryptocurrency. Of course, we hosted at Ferris Cars. What is Cars, etc., etc. about? Well, it's about cars, etc., etc. and collectibles and those kind of things. You know, what do people collect? What is classic? What should people be collecting? And joining me today is the chairman of the BMW Club in Gauteng, Colin van Son. He's here with me. Colin, looking mighty spiffy, and I must just tell you, you arrived in one of my favorite BMWs of all time, and I'm in envy. Tell me about the car you came in.
So she's affectionately known in the club as Lipstick because she's obviously bright red. That's a 1971 BMW 3-litre CSI. E9 is the designation, and I restored her in about 2010 to 2012. So, yeah, bare metal respray, drives like new. I've been down to Margate with her twice, no issues.
Oh, she's very pretty. We'll get on to her a little bit later. But BMW, it's one of those marks. And I must say, I am a closet BMW fan. I even owned one at one stage, a 323i. Cabriolet.
Awesome.
Not bad, eh?
Yeah.
Not bad. And I did change the exhaust, so I thought I was a proper oak. But there's something amazing about BMWs, and specifically here in South Africa. I mean, you've got one of the biggest clubs, if not the biggest club, car club in the country.
Absolutely. And in fact, probably in the whole of Africa. So we're up to about 750 members at one stage, pre-COVID. At the moment now, about 650. So yeah, very, very big. And I think we really cater for all diverse tastes, from the adrenaline junkies on the racetrack. And I'm sure we can cover that in a future episode, because we've got one of the biggest single mark race series in the country. And then also just for the social guys who want to do a breakfast run, who want to do some skid pan training, etc. So we cover, and obviously the concourse, you mentioned Lipstick earlier, where the guys come and showcase their beauty. So our annual concourse d'elegance is always one of the highlights of the calendar.
I mean, there's so much that we've got to get through during the course of Cars, etc., etc. I'm going to put this out there. Everyone loves a BMW. Now, you're going to get your Audi guys who say, no, I'll never drive a BMW. You get BMW, I'll never drive an Audi. But there's something very special about a BMW. Do you think there's a lot of jealousy amongst the various marques?
I do think so. I think it's very much an aspirational brand. It's a premium brand as well. And I think from years ago, it was sheer driving pleasure was their logo. And I think it's very engaging, particularly the older cars, what they call the analog cars from the 80s and the 90s and the noughties. They were very much more engaging, less sort of electronics, putting a damp on things, and more sort of bums in seat mentality, where you can feel what the car's doing. And sometimes it would go a little bit wrong, quite often in the rain, apparently.
Apparently. And also, I mean, for the majority of their lives, they've all been rear-wheel drive.
Yeah,
you know, and
absolutely.
There's something very special about driving rear-wheel drive.
For sure, and especially with the LSD, and it's got nothing to do with drugs. That's limited slip diff, and that's pretty much what lets you go sideways, where the back overtakes the front.
There's one thing, and you know, I want to just dispel this for a lot of people. Do BMWs come standard with indicators?
Apparently, although a lot of people do think it's an option that very few people tick. I think it's probably because it's so expensive to replace them, so they don't use it very often, just so it doesn't wear
It's
out.
just one of those, because I mean, there's like a million memes on social media about BMW drivers. Now, you've come in the CSI,
yeah,
and one of my first cars that I ever saw was the CSL, the BMW, and it just stuck out for me. And then, of course, it turned into the Batmobile.
Yeah.
I mean, are there a few of those cars around? I mean, how many do you know of are here still in South Africa?
So surprisingly, in South Africa, probably more than you may think. So Richard, at one stage we were up to 8. I think there's about 7 that I'm aware of. 5 left-hand drives, 3 right-hand drives that are still in the country. I actually own one of the left-hand drives, believe it or not. It's a blue one. It's not here today. So that's blue suede shoes. So you must have to name each of your cars, otherwise you've...
you like Sebastian Vettel.
Children. There we go.
There we go. Okay. That's amazing. So, I mean, you've got one of those. I mean, they're so special. Was CSL was that the beginning of sort of lightweight M power for BMW?
100%. I think that was really the pioneers of the motorsport, and where the motorsport brand and the company within BMW Motorsport sort of started, I think around 1972, if I'm not mistaken, and they really started with those, the CSLs. So if you go onto, there's a website, BMW M Registry, and it's actually that the 222 Turbo is actually viewed as an M car, even though it didn't have the M badge on it at the time. So that was obviously only derived later with the M5, but it's definitely seen as the forefather and the pioneers of motorsport.
You know, you bring up the 2002, and I remember many, many years ago at Kyle Army, there was a classic track day, and there was a lady driving a 2002 and put her on the roof. And I cried. I mean, I cried for her. It was, I don't know if they repaired it, but that's also such a classic car. Talking of value of these cars, before we start getting into, you know, the bigger M ranges, CSL, even the CSI that you've come in, 2002s, are they increasing in value? Are people restoring them? Or they just sort of like, hey, it's just cool to have? I mean, are people seeing great value in these cars?
I think so, and I think it's because there's such limited supply, and there's more and more demand as the baby boomers, the Generation X, sort of aspire to these cars they played with. They're like, but I can almost afford to have one of these, and I think they've really pushed the demand, or the prices have pushed it. They've gone through the roof, so the demand's pushed the prices through the roof, and it's just got so expensive. Some of them, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Yeah,
I can imagine. But the one thing that does worry me a little bit when we look at the classic car market, you know, let's say, for example, I'm looking for a BMW 850.
Yeah.
Okay. And I go, well, okay, let me go and have a look. And I find a registry in the UK, and it gives me some number in pounds. And then all of a sudden I multiply that by 20 or whatever the exchange rate is. And then is that the real value in South African money?
Typically not really, and I think there's also that sort of barrier to entry. So if you were to buy it in the UK, then you'd still need to import it here.
Yes.
Import duty, ad valorem, etc., going to cost you probably even more than that. So our buying power is unfortunately not as good as the overseas currencies. So some cars are equivalent to that, but a lot of them unfortunately are much cheaper. And we're seeing a lot of cars, Fords, BMWs, get exported to overseas markets because it's at a discount. Compared to what they can get. And our cars are relatively rust-free compared to some of the European climates. One
of the better marks on South African roads where you don't get a lot of rust. I mentioned the 850. I just think it's just such a magnificent and stunning car. Are there a few around? And do they change hands?
There are a few. I see them occasionally coming up for sale. So BMW actually officially sold the 850, which was a V12, 5 litre and later 5.4. There's a couple of 840s that were imported from the UK. They've got the V8 in there, and there's two that I know of, the 850 CSI, which was basically the M8 in all but a name. It had a V12 sort of a M-derived version with 286 kilowatts. So it's an amazing car, 6-speed manual, and that beautiful, beautiful shape.
Speaking of CSI, I want to go 635 CSI, because I know in Europe, I think there was a 628 that they made, but I don't think any came here. But the 635, sought after, surely, and very few.
Yeah, absolutely. So they are quite rare in South Africa, certainly more plentiful in the E9, my CSI outside. So BMW did sell them, but they were quite pricey in the 80s when our inflation was so high. So there are a handful that have changed hands. A few years ago, they were 50,000. Now they're 250 to 500,000. Wow. Just because, particularly if they're in really good condition, either been restored well or original good condition. Yeah.
Now, before I get into the M cars, there's something that bothers me with just about every motor manufacturer, and that is that now you go and buy yourself a M3, and then somebody says, "Oh no, this is an E46." Now you're mentioning now the E9.
Yes.
Now, for those who are not in the know. Like I know a little bit, you know, you guys talk in a different kind of language. Oh yes, but that's an E9 spec. And if you talk about Porsche, you know, that's a 911, but it's a 996. Yes. It's all very, very confusing. How does BMW come about these numbers, and why does E46 stick in my brain?
Absolutely. So they actually started with the E, and I'm not actually 100% sure, but I think it stands for something in German that's the design, and each one that they put out had a number. So like my one outside you mentioned is the E9. The 4-door version of that was the E3. But there were a couple of numbers that obviously never went to production. So you don't get like I can't think, like an E8 or E7. There's no such thing. But then later...
It's confusing.
It is very confusing. And then they sort of went up very slowly. The E30, you'll know, the Gushesh or the box shape, virtually everyone knows that. And they slowly built up, like you said, the E46. So that was the 3 Series of the early 2000s. And then suddenly you look again, and then the F and the G, they literally just started using the alphabet very quickly. So they obviously came up with a lot of designs very quickly.
I mean, and listen, you're a very bright man. I mean, you're an actuary by profession. And this must be very confusing, even for you.
Absolutely. And I must say, because I'm passionate about the classics, that makes sense to me. But the higher numbers and the Fs and the Gs, I have to go Google it because I'm not 100% sure of what the guys are talking about. So I hear exactly it's almost a technical jargon in a specific subject. I mean, you're like, what are you talking about? So,
but it is, in a way, it is quite wonderful because, you know, if you go into forums and you see BMW Passionista talking amongst themselves, well, it's an E46 this and an E34 there, and you sort of get confused, but in their way, it's their code. That, you know, they know what they're talking about. I need springs for that car. Okay, I know what you're talking about. So it must be there for a reason, besides just a design shape.
Yeah, it goes with a secret handshake, I think.
It may well be. Let's get on to the M models. And I mean, I've been very lucky to drive a lot of the M cars. I think there's just something about M. You know, you get an M3, M5. Let's focus on those two at the moment because I think M3 was the first one to come out after CSL.
Yeah.
And I remember when the first M3s came out here in South Africa, after a while, BMW enforced that the owners go on an advanced driving course because these cars were such, you know, a handful. They so much power. Those cars must be incredibly popular still today.
They are, and that would be the E36, and we're not going to go into that, but it was basically in the early 90s that they came out, and very much, only came out originally in the 2-door, was a 3-litre 5-speed manual, and I was actually lucky enough to go. I didn't have my driver's license, I wasn't 18 yet, but my dad knew one of the guys who worked at BM, and he arranged for us to go around Kyalami as passengers in that M3, and I think that was where the bug bit. So you're 100% right, because the guys would often, especially in the rain, didn't have traction control. They put foot and it just sort of
bites you.
The back overtakes the front and the tree says, how's it? So it's very sad.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about turbo versus normally aspirated, but surely one of the most desirable cars in the world has got to be the M5 V10.
Yeah, that Formula One sound. So. And it's quite interesting. A lot of guys collect specific cars. There was one guy I knew who had all the M3s, starting from the E30, which we never got here, the left-hand drive, then the 90s one, the 2000 one, and then the V8, which was equivalent, if you like, 2 cylinders lopped off from the V10. Because that a friend of mine has one of those in the Touring, which is the station wagon. And that thing, I mean, it sounds like a Formula One car with that V10. It's absolutely brilliant.
But there can't be a lot of them around. So I mean, it's also again supply and demand. But I mean, if these come up for sale somewhere, surely people are snapping at the heels.
The V10s, if that's been well maintained, so a lot of the cars of the 2000s had sort of big end bearing, not issues, but they had to be redone at about 100,000 kilos, which can be quite a pricey exercise. So if some guys are a little bit hesitant if they're not sure of the history, if it's got a sketchy history. A mate of mine bought one at an auction, which has had an engine light on. And I think it cost him like 100 or 150 grand later. Entire engine rebuild, new crank, everything. So they can be expensive.
You bring up something that I think vitally important when it comes to looking at what we call classic cars. You know, for those who don't know, I mean, a classic car is 25 years old. So anything in 1998 is a classic car nowadays. Nowadays, a person buys himself a new car. It comes with a 5-year motor plan or 7-year or whatever it is. If someone goes out and sees like your 3-litre CSI or a 2002 or an M5 or an M3 from 20, 25, 30 odd years ago, in terms of maintenance, getting these things repaired up to, decent road going condition that you can use on an everyday basis, is it very expensive or is it manageable?
It's actually surprisingly manageable. You won't believe. I mean, I do the services on this one. It's an oil change every 10,000 Ks. The oil filter's about $200. The oil's $300-400, and it's done. So it's actually relative to modern cars, probably a lot cheaper. And maybe just a point that you alerted me or reminded me of there. Often with the classics, the guys don't drive them often enough. And what happens is all the seals from the brakes go, they rust in the tank, and then it costs you big money because now you have to go and get the injectors clean, get the tank sort of sandblasted and coated, etc. So I try and drive mine at least every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because otherwise they just go backwards.
I think that is most probably some of the most important advice when it comes to, you know what, any car that you believe is of value, but specifically you buy something that's a little bit old, if you don't drive it, you're going to land up with trouble. As you say, this seals the fuel linings, all of that kind of stuff.
Battery goes.
Oh, no, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
The world is moving. You know, yes, we're eventually going to electric cars, but most manufacturers over the past few years have sort of dumping naturally aspirated engines and moving back into a turbo kind of era. But this is a different kind of turbo. I mean, it's completely different to what we had 20, 30 years ago. But which is more desirable? You know, the person sitting there going, oh, I want to buy a BMW. Should I go for that M5 V10? Or should I actually sit and actually go and buy myself a brand new M5 with turbo technology and newer technology?
Yeah. It often goes with the car, that the shape that the person likes. They like the very first M5, the analog M5, the shark nose E28 M5 from the 80s, which came out only with naturally aspirated. Yeah. And the newer cars, which were from about the late 2000s, that came out with a turbo. Obviously, the turbos are a lot faster. You can tune them. You can turn that boost up. They can be crazy. They're expensive if they break. It's just so it really comes down to a personal preference. A lot of guys do say that the naturally aspirated have a better sound. The V10, the V8, the 6-cylinder. The turbo mutes that a little bit, but it's still a 6-cylinder BM has a wonderful sound.
It's a beautiful sound, and you can always get a pipe, just to let you know.
This is true.
In South Africa, what is the BMW most people are looking for in terms of a classic? Somebody says, man, I'm looking for something. Colin, can you find me this? What is the most desirable car?
As chairman of the club, I often get calls, guys, I'm looking for an E30 325IS, looking for a 333i. That's probably the number one. And I think it was really people want to recreate their childhood when they grew up, whether it was in the suburbs, the townships, that was the car to have. The most amazing sound with that M20 motor. To a lesser extent than the very first M5, the E28, the 6-cylinder, the 8 Series. People also looking for the 850, the 840. And then now the E46 that you mentioned, the early 2003 series, very desirable, last of the 6-cylinder, naturally aspirated. And often when the guys come and collect a car, they said, I want the last V8 3 series, the last V10 5 series. And that's often how they then choose, which happened to often be the first in it as well, because it was the only one. Then they moved on to bigger cylinders or a turbo.
Unbelievable. Correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't the 333 a sort of South African development, and it was one of those where you could either have air conditioning or power steering. Is that correct?
100%. So the E30 M3, which was raced overseas, only came in left-hand drive, and I don't know what the reasons were. They said it wasn't economical to make it for the right-hand drive markets. Okay. So South Africa said no, they want to go racing, so they took a 733. From the mid-80s, and they took that and shoehorned it inside a 323 like you had.
Yeah.
And there was so little space, the guys had to choose between aircon and power steering. So most guys chose the aircon with the climate because you still got steering anyway. And the 325IS was also unique to South Africa with the 2.7 motor, the Evolution 1 and 2. It replaced the 333 for Group N racing with Tony Viana.
Tony Viana. Yeah, that just brings so many emotions. Floods of emotions. And you know, the great thing about this is we'll definitely get to the racing club of BMW as well, because I think that's going to be a tremendous amount of fun. Which current BMWs that are out now, and I mean, listen, we've got 1 Series, 2 Series, 3 Series, 4 Series, 5 Series, 6, 7 Series, 7 Series, 8 Series. Yeah. Okay, we have a tremendous range of cars out there. Which of the current BMWs do you think in the future will be determined as classics? They are now available, current, but man, that is already a classic. Which are the ones you think?
So on the process of elimination, I gave this a little bit of thought, and certainly based on past experience, your X drives, your X's are not that desirable or collectible. Everyone seems to like the cars, and they also want the top end. So for me, it comes again to the M, the most powerful letter in the world. So the M, there isn't an M1 because the original M1 was in the 80s, but the M2 competition, M3, M4, particularly with manual, if they are still available, because they are sort of cutting that to most markets. Ironically, only the Americans get it, who never used to have manuals, and now the tables are turned. So
I'm hoping they do another M3 Frozen.
That was awesome with the matte.
Oh, gee, that was something. And I mean, that's it. The M's that come out are the cars that are going to be the classics. They're the ones, if you can get one now, hold on to it. But also drive it, because, if you don't drive it, you're going to land.
Drive it sparingly. So do 50 Ks in a month or whatever, and it'll keep the mileage low.
Colin, before I let you go, just two small things. Number one, your belt.
I bought it. I got it at McDonald's in one of those Happy Meals. I was telling the guy today. Now, it was actually made by BMW a couple of years ago, and I was a little bit slow on the uptake. So by the time I said, I want this, and they're like, sorry, they were out of stock, and I found one on eBay, and I got a mate of mine to bring it in for me. So
you see, somebody who lives and breathes the brand. I mean, that's, it's just fantastic. Now, you're part of the BMW club, of course. Gauteng must be BMW club across the whole country. Somebody who's watching this, who says, I've just got a BMW and I'd love to find out a little bit more, get involved, my first BM. How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so we've got a website, bmwcarclub.co.za, or on our Facebook page. We've got a Facebook group and a Facebook page with an amazing amount of followers. We also do valuations, insurance valuations, and maybe just to pick up one of the points that you mentioned earlier about the cars increasing in value. It's one of the services we offer for our 500 Rand a year membership, that the club members can get their cars valued by our valuations committee. So that it's insured for a fair value, because the book value might show 20,000 Rand, but in reality, it's worth 150,000 Rand. So it's something that we do quite regularly.
Well, there we go. If you have just bought yourself your first BMW, you're looking to get involved with BMW in some way, whether it's in the classic car market or something brand new, get in touch with the BMW Club. It is definitely worth it. Colin, we could carry on talking for hours and hours on BMW, and I'm sure we will do this again. But sure. You know what? Thanks so much for your insights and just giving us an idea of what is out there, what is available, how affordable it is to actually delve into collectible kind of BMWs. And it seems as though there's just a tremendous passion still for this wonderful brand.
Absolutely. And we've actually had amazing support from the manufacturer, BMW South Africa as well. We've actually come on board this year to sponsor our race series. It's now called the BMW M Performance Parts race series. So our long-time sponsor, Bridgestone, had changed their sponsorship to focus on the Olympics in 2020 and 2021. So we approached BMW and they came on board. So it's so fantastic to be backed by the manufacturer.
Listen, that's fantastic, and I'm definitely going to take you up. I'm coming to see the blue suede shoes, okay?
You're welcome. You're welcome.
There we go. That is Cars Etc. for this episode, of course, brought to us by altcointrader.co.za. Go there, register, and get yourself involved in crypto. From me, Sasha Martinengo, I will see you again very soon. Take care. Ciao, ciao.
Ferris Cars is a Ferrari specialist dealership in Sandton, Johannesburg. Since 2010, Ferris Cars has dealt in all things related to Maranello's finest, from classics to the contemporary. Sales, service, advice, and exclusive events, Ferris either has it or has access to it. And of course, in partnership with Altcoin Trader, Ferris Cars accepts cryptocurrency and can even help you buy your dream car from any other dealership in crypto. Check out their website at ferriscars.com or follow them on all popular social media platforms.